Introduction: the drama maker is in big legal trouble. Your money is finally coming back. When the facts finally walk into the room, the drama maker doesn't just lose the argument, they start looking for a lawyer. Chosen ones. There is something happening behind the scenes that you may not fully understand yet. The person who created confusion, stirred up chaos, manipulated the story, and made everything feel like one endless season of The Real Housewives of Legal Consequences may have finally pushed the situation too far. Because drama is easy when nobody is checking the details. A person can twist words, recruit people, play victim, hide behind confusion, and make you feel as though you are the problem. But there is one thing even the greatest drama maker cannot permanently control: the record. And here is a fact: in serious disputes, patterns matter, dates matter, messages matter, transactions matter, contradictions matter. People often believe a lie becomes strong simply because it has been repeated for a long time. But repetition does not turn a falsehood into truth. It only creates more opportunities for the lie to contradict itself. And that is where things can begin to change. What they thought was just a story they could control may now be turning into a trail they cannot explain. Every version that changed, every excuse that did not add up, every delay that was supposed to exhaust you, every financial decision they thought would disappear into the confusion. The same chaos that once protected them may now be exposing the structure behind what happened. And let us be brutally honest. Some people love drama until drama comes with paperwork. Suddenly, the person who had enough energy to create 20 problems before breakfast becomes deeply interested in peace. Funny how that works. But this is bigger than revenge. This is about accountability. Because while you were dealing with the emotional weight of what happened, something else was quietly developing, a clearer picture. And when the right people begin looking at the right details, noise can lose its power very quickly. So if you thought your money was simply gone, the story may not be over. If you thought the delays meant defeat, think again. If you thought the person behind the chaos would never face the consequences of their actions, you may be witnessing the moment the entire situation begins to turn. The drama maker is in big legal trouble, and the very thing they thought they had successfully taken from you may be finding its way back. Number 1. The drama maker never expected their own evidence to become the case against them. The most dangerous mistake a drama maker can make is believing that evidence belongs to them simply because they created it. Every message, payment, promise, accusation, contradiction, and sudden change in their story can eventually become part of a much bigger picture. What they once used to control the narrative may end up exposing exactly how the situation unfolded. That is where the whole game can change. When someone keeps changing their version of events, they may feel like they are escaping accountability because each new explanation sounds convincing on its own. But once those explanations are placed side by side, the cracks become difficult to ignore. One statement conflicts with another. One transaction raises a new question. One message suddenly gives an entirely different meaning to something they said later. And the uncomfortable truth is that evidence does not care who is louder. It does not care who has more supporters, who can create the biggest scene, or who can make themselves look like the victim. Evidence simply sits there waiting to be examined. That is why the very material they thought protected them can become their biggest problem. They may have spent months controlling the conversation, but they could never completely control the record. Eventually, the story stops being about who shouted the loudest and starts being about what can actually be proven. Number 2, every lie created a financial trail. They thought nobody was patient enough to follow. Money leaves traces. That is the part many people forget when they become too confident in their own story. A person can rewrite a conversation, deny what they promised, or create an entirely different version of events, but financial activity can be much harder to simply talk away. A payment has a date, a transfer has a record, an agreement can have a timestamp, a receipt can connect one decision to another. Even small transactions can become important when they are viewed alongside everything else. This is why the real turning point may not come from one dramatic piece of evidence. It can come from several ordinary details finally being connected. Something that looked insignificant months ago can suddenly become relevant when placed beside another transaction, another message, or another claim. And that is where the drama maker may have made a serious mistake, assuming nobody would have the patience to follow the trail. They counted on confusion doing the work for them. They counted on frustration making you give up. They counted on time burying the details. But time does not necessarily erase records. Sometimes it gives investigators, lawyers, or other legitimate decision-makers more material to examine. The story they carefully constructed may eventually collide with the financial trail they never thought anyone would bother following. And when those two stories do not match, the drama can become evidence of something far more serious. Number 3, they confused public noise with legal power, and that was their most expensive mistake. Making a lot of noise can make someone look powerful, but noise is not the same thing as proof. That may be the mistake the drama maker never saw coming. They believed that if enough people heard their version first, everyone else would automatically accept it. They turned the situation into a performance, gathered attention, pushed emotions to the front, and perhaps assumed the louder side would eventually win. But legal matters do not work like a popularity contest. A dramatic story can attract an audience, but it does not automatically establish ownership, liability, or entitlement. Those things depend on facts, records, agreements, and applicable law. And once the situation reaches people whose job is to examine those details, the performance can suddenly become irrelevant. That is where their confidence may begin to collapse. The same accusations that sounded powerful in public can become surprisingly weak when someone calmly asks for supporting evidence. The same bold claims can become uncomfortable when dates, payments, messages, and documents are placed next to them. Suddenly, being convincing is not enough. And this is the brutal part. The more noise someone creates, the more carefully their claims may eventually need to be checked. They thought they were controlling the story. They may have only been creating a bigger record for someone else to examine. Because when legal accountability enters the room, applause disappears, emotions lose their authority, and facts take the microphone. Number 4, the money was never truly gone. It was buried beneath delay, confusion, and deliberate distraction. Sometimes the most frustrating part of a financial dispute is not losing money. It is watching the situation become so confusing that you start wondering whether you will ever see it again. Delays pile up, explanations change, new excuses appear. Suddenly, the original issue is buried underneath so much noise that finding the truth feels like searching through a mountain of paperwork. But confusion does not automatically mean the money has disappeared. In legitimate disputes, financial records can remain traceable long after the arguments have faded. Transfers, receipts, contracts, invoices, account statements, and other records can help establish what happened and when. That is why delay can be misleading. Time passing may create frustration, but it does not necessarily erase the underlying facts. And this is where the drama maker may have miscalculated. They may have believed that keeping everything complicated would eventually exhaust everyone involved. They may have relied on constant distractions to keep attention away from the financial issue itself. But once the distractions are removed, the original question becomes painfully simple. Where did the money go? Who received it? And what was it supposed to be used for? That question does not need theatrics. It needs answers. And when the paperwork begins telling a different story from the one being performed publicly, the confusion can start working against the person who created it. Because sometimes the money is not lost. The truth about it has simply been buried under too much noise. Number 5, the moment you stopped arguing emotionally, their entire strategy lost its fuel. One of the biggest mistakes people make during conflict is allowing the other person to decide the emotional temperature of the entire situation. The drama maker thrives when everything becomes a reaction. Anger creates another argument, frustration creates another explanation, and every explanation creates another distraction. The cycle keeps moving, while the original issue quietly disappears. But something changes when you stop feeding that cycle. You stop responding to every accusation. You stop defending yourself against every ridiculous claim. You stop trying to convince people who have already decided what they want to believe. Most importantly, you begin separating your emotions from the facts. That shift can be incredibly powerful. Instead of arguing about who is right, you start keeping records. Instead of responding to every provocation, you focus on what can actually be established. Instead of chasing every new story, you return to the original issue. And suddenly the person who depended on your reactions has a problem. There is nothing dramatic to manipulate when you refuse to participate in the drama. This does not mean pretending you do not care. It means understanding that emotional exhaustion can be exactly what keeps a messy situation alive. When you stop providing endless reactions, the attention moves back toward the facts. That is when contradictions become easier to notice, timelines become clearer, and claims can be examined without the fog of anger. The game changes when you stop playing the game they designed. Number 6, they made so many versions of the story that contradiction became their biggest enemy. A story can survive one mistake. It becomes much harder to defend when the story keeps changing. That may be the quiet weakness the drama maker never noticed. Every new explanation might have been designed to fix the previous one, but instead, each adjustment created another version that could eventually be compared with everything said before. At first, changing details may seem harmless. Someone remembers something differently. A date gets corrected. A conversation is explained from another angle. But when the changes become frequent and involve important facts, people naturally begin paying closer attention. That is where contradiction becomes dangerous. One statement can be challenged. Two conflicting statements can create uncertainty. But a long trail of different explanations can raise an entirely different concern. Why does the story keep moving? The irony is that the person trying hardest to control the narrative may end up making the narrative impossible to control. Messages, documents, receipts, recordings, dates, and other legitimate records can preserve details long after emotions have cooled down. Once those details are compared, inconsistencies that seemed tiny at the time can suddenly become significant. And this is the part many drama makers fail to understand. You do not need to defeat every version of the story. Sometimes you only need to place the versions beside each other. Then the contradictions begin speaking for themselves. The problem was never that they had too many words. The problem was that eventually those words stopped agreeing with one another. Number 7. The drama was designed to make you feel helpless while they bought time behind the scenes. One of the oldest tricks in a messy conflict is making the other person so overwhelmed that they stop focusing on the original issue. Suddenly, there is a new accusation, a new argument, a new emergency, or another explanation demanding attention. The situation becomes exhausting, and exhaustion can make even a strong person wonder whether it is easier to simply walk away. That may have been the real purpose of all the noise. Every distraction buys time. Every unnecessary argument pushes the important details further into the background. And while everyone is busy reacting to the latest drama, the original financial issue can quietly disappear from the conversation. But time can be a dangerous strategy when records still exist. The delay may have been intended to make you lose interest, yet it can also create a longer trail of decisions, messages, transactions, and explanations. The more time passes, the more opportunities there may be for different versions of the story to emerge. That creates an uncomfortable problem for the person who thought they were safely controlling the situation. Because once the distractions are stripped away, the central issue remains. The shouting does not answer it. The accusations do not answer it. The endless delays do not answer it. Only the facts can. And that is why what looked like a successful strategy of distraction can eventually become something else entirely. The very time they thought was protecting them may have given the truth more room to reveal itself. Sometimes delay does not destroy accountability. It simply postpones the moment it arrives. Number 8, they thought the damage was only emotional, but the financial consequences are now becoming impossible to ignore. Some people treat emotional damage as if it has no real-world consequences. They create confusion, break trust, cause unnecessary conflict, and then act as though everything disappears once the argument is over. But when money is involved, the situation can become much more serious because financial consequences can be measured, documented, and traced. That is where the drama maker may have underestimated the situation. What looked like a personal dispute may have created financial questions that cannot simply be laughed away. Payments still have records. Agreements still have terms. Losses can sometimes be calculated, and decisions made during the chaos can leave consequences long after the emotional argument has ended. This is why the real issue may no longer be about who hurt whom or who looked worse in public. It may come down to what can actually be established and what financial responsibility, if any, follows from those facts. The uncomfortable part is that emotional manipulation can sometimes work for a while, because people become too exhausted to examine the details. But money has a way of forcing attention back to reality. A person can dismiss your feelings. They cannot automatically dismiss a documented financial claim. And that changes everything. The drama may have been entertaining to spectators, but the consequences are not entertainment. Once legitimate financial questions demand legitimate answers, the person who treated everything like a performance may discover that real-world accountability has no interest in their theatrics. Number 9, the people who helped them create the chaos are now discovering that loyalty does not cancel liability. Loyalty can make people do strange things. Someone may defend a friend, repeat their version of events, pass along accusations, or become involved in a dispute without ever stopping to examine the facts for themselves. At the beginning, it can feel like standing together against an enemy. But when the situation becomes serious, blind loyalty can suddenly become an uncomfortable position, because supporting someone does not automatically make their story true. And it certainly does not erase personal responsibility for your own actions. This is where some of the people surrounding the drama maker may have miscalculated. They may have believed they were simply helping someone win an argument. They may not have realized that repeating claims, handling money, sending messages, or taking other actions could create their own questions if those actions become relevant to a legitimate investigation or dispute. Suddenly, being just a friend is not necessarily the complete explanation. The safest position is always to know what you are actually participating in, rather than blindly following someone else's version of events. And there is a brutal irony here. The people who helped make the drama louder may eventually become the people who know exactly how the story was constructed. Once that happens, loyalty can become complicated. Because when consequences arrive, friendship does not rewrite records, erase transactions, or change facts. Everyone becomes responsible for their own choices. And sometimes the person who thought they was helping someone hide the truth eventually becomes the person who has to explain what they personally did. Number 10. What looked like a personal attack may now be examined as a pattern with serious consequences. A single incident can sometimes be dismissed as a misunderstanding. People argue. People make mistakes. People say things they later regret. But when similar behavior keeps happening, the conversation can change completely. What once looked like one isolated attack may begin to look like a pattern that deserves much closer attention. That is where the drama maker may have made a serious mistake. Repeated accusations, financial disputes, conflicting explanations, broken promises, or similar actions involving different people can raise questions that one isolated incident might never raise. The important thing is not exaggeration, it is documentation. Patterns become meaningful when there are actual facts connecting the events. And this is why constantly creating new drama can become dangerous for the person creating it. Every new incident creates another piece of information. Every message adds context. Every financial transaction can establish a timeline. Every explanation can eventually be compared with what came before. The story becomes much harder to control when it is no longer one person's word against another. Instead, there may be a trail. That does not automatically prove wrongdoing, and serious legal conclusions should always come from the appropriate authorities or professionals. But it can mean the situation deserves more careful examination than the drama maker expected. The irony is almost painful. They may have thought every new attack strengthened their position. Instead, they may have been creating a larger record. And sometimes the thing that finally changes everything is not one explosive revelation, but the moment someone notices that too many separate pieces fit the same troubling pattern. Number 11. They spent your resources acting powerful, without understanding that possession and ownership are not the same thing. Having control of something does not automatically mean you legally own it. That simple distinction can completely change the direction of a financial dispute. Someone may hold the money, manage the account, control an asset, or have access to resources, but access and ownership are not necessarily the same thing. This is where confidence can become a serious mistake. A person may spend money as though possession itself gives them permission. They may make decisions assuming nobody will challenge them. They may even become so comfortable with control that they forget one important detail. Financial rights can depend on agreements, records, applicable law, and the circumstances surrounding how the money or property was obtained. And once those details are examined, appearances can become irrelevant. The question is no longer who acted the most confident. It becomes whether the person had the actual right to do what they did. That distinction matters because money does not become someone's personal property simply because they managed to keep it for a long time. Nor does confidence turn an uncertain claim into an established right. This is why the drama maker's biggest mistake may have been confusing control with ownership. They acted as though the matter was finished because they had possession. But possession can be temporary. Ownership can be disputed. And when legitimate records, agreements, and financial history are examined carefully, the person who looked untouchable may discover that their strongest-looking position was never as secure as they believed. Sometimes the real power was not in who had the money. It was in who could actually prove the right to it. Number 12. The pressure changed. The moment. The right questions began replacing the wrong arguments. There comes a point in every messy dispute when arguing stops being useful and careful examination begins. That moment can completely change the balance of a situation. Instead of getting dragged into every accusation, attention shifts toward the details that actually matter. Where did the money go? What was agreed? When did it happen? What records support the claim? Who was responsible for each decision? Those questions may sound simple, but they can cut through an enormous amount of confusion. A drama maker can spend hours explaining motives, attacking someone's character, or creating emotional distractions. But none of that necessarily answers a straightforward question about a transaction or agreement. That is why the right questions can be more powerful than the loudest argument. They remove the stage. They remove the performance. They force the conversation back toward facts. And once that happens, pressure can move in a completely different direction. The person who was comfortable making accusations may suddenly have to explain details they never expected anyone to examine closely. A confident story can become uncomfortable when every important claim has to be supported. This does not mean every unanswered question proves wrongdoing. It means that serious disputes are often clarified by evidence rather than emotion. That distinction is crucial. The drama maker may have believed the pressure was always on you to defend yourself. But when the right questions are finally asked, the burden of explaining what actually happened can shift. And that is when the entire atmosphere changes, because facts do not need to shout. They simply need to be examined. Number 13. Your money is coming back. Because delay does not erase a legitimate claim, it only makes the story longer. Delay can feel like defeat, especially when months pass and nothing seems to change. But waiting for a resolution does not automatically mean the underlying claim has disappeared. In many financial disputes, the important question is not how long the situation has taken, but what the available records and applicable rules actually establish. That distinction matters. A person may have assumed that keeping someone waiting would eventually make them give up. They may have counted on frustration doing the job for them. But time can also create a more detailed record. More messages, more transactions, more explanations, and more opportunities for inconsistencies to become visible. The longer the story continues, the harder it can become to pretend that nothing happened. But there is an important reality here. Nobody should assume that money is automatically coming back simply because a dispute exists. Recovery depends on the facts, the evidence, the agreements involved, and the legal process that applies. That is what makes this moment so important. If the claim is legitimate and properly supported, delay does not magically turn it into nothing. It may simply mean the process is taking longer than expected. And sometimes that longer process reveals things that would have remained hidden if everything had been settled quickly. The drama maker may have believed time was their greatest protection, but time can work both ways. Every additional day can add another piece to the record. And when those pieces finally come together, the question is no longer whether the drama was convincing. It is whether the facts support returning what is rightfully owed. Number 14. The drama maker is finally discovering that you can control a narrative, but you cannot control what the facts eventually reveal. A person can control a story for a surprisingly long time. They can choose which details to reveal, which ones to hide, who gets blamed, and which version reaches the public first. They can even make a complicated situation sound incredibly simple. But there is a limit to how much storytelling can accomplish when facts begin being examined independently. That is the point where control starts slipping away, because facts do not need permission to exist. A message remains a message. A transaction remains a transaction. An agreement remains an agreement. A timeline does not suddenly change because somebody tells a more convincing story about it. And when different pieces of information are placed together, the gaps between what was said and what actually happened can become much easier to notice. This is why the final stage of a dispute can feel completely different from the beginning. At first, everyone is reacting to the loudest voice. Later, people start looking at the evidence. That transition can be devastating for someone who depended heavily on controlling perception. The audience may move on, emotions may cool down, and the drama may eventually become old news. But records can remain available long after everyone has stopped talking, and that is the uncomfortable truth. You can manipulate attention, you can influence opinions, you can create confusion, but you cannot guarantee that the facts will cooperate with your version of events. Eventually, the performance ends and the details remain, and when the details tell a different story, no amount of drama can rewrite them. Conclusion. At the end of all this, the biggest lesson is simple. Noise can delay the truth, but it cannot permanently replace it. The drama maker may have relied on confusion, changing stories, emotional pressure, delays, and public attention to make the situation look impossible to untangle. But underneath all that noise, the facts were still there. The records were still there. The financial trail was still there. The contradictions were still there. And every new explanation created another piece of the story that could eventually be examined. That is why this situation should not be viewed simply as a battle between two people. It is about accountability, evidence, and the difference between controlling a narrative and proving a claim. Someone can look powerful in public and still have serious questions waiting for them behind the scenes. And if money is genuinely owed, the important thing is not revenge. It is proper documentation, patience, and following the legitimate process required to establish what happened and what can lawfully be recovered. So do not let temporary silence convince you that nothing is happening. Do not let delays automatically convince you that you have lost. And do not confuse someone else's confidence with proof that they are right. Sometimes the biggest turning point arrives quietly, not with a dramatic announcement, not with a public argument, but when the right evidence finally reaches the right hands. The drama may have had its moment. Now the facts get theirs. If this message gave you a different perspective, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more deep, thought-provoking content. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective could be the missing piece of the conversation. And remember, when the noise fades, the truth still has a voice. God bless you.